In this lesson, we're going to start to have some fun, and that's going to be by passing functions into other functions. And as a note here, in previous lessons, I've shown how to be the consumer of functions that take other functions as input parameters. And that is the consumer of higher order functions. And that's when you're writing code, like when you're using map and filter. But in this lesson, what I'm going to do is flip the table a little bit. And now I want to show you how to be the producer of higher order functions. And that is how to write your own functions like map and filter. And in order to do that, we're going to write functions that take other functions as input parameters. As we go through this process, I want to show at least three things. The first is the syntax that you use to define function input parameters. Then I want to show multiple examples of that syntax. And then I want to show how to execute a function once you have a reference to it or once you have received it as an input parameter. And finally, as a beneficial side effect of this lesson, once we go through this process, you'll find that you're able to read the Scala doc for other higher order functions and their function signatures much more easily. So the way I want to do this, I just want to start writing some code. So let's say we had a sum function and it just sums two integers. So I and j will be those two integers. And then it's going to return an int because that's the sum of these two. And then again, that's just I plus j right there. And now as you're working along, you might think, oh, wouldn't it be really cool if I could somehow have a function that would do the sum of two numbers and then print those numbers? So you start writing something like this and you say, well, now we're going to take in A and B. And because this is going to print the numbers as its last action, this is going to return unit. And then what I want to do is say, well, I want to get the result of summing A and B. And then I want to print that result. And now in order to run that, I just need a main function. So we'll call this will be higher order functions number one is the name of that. So it's a main function. And all I want to do is sum and print. And we're going to do something like 2 and 3 right there. So go ahead and save that. And I have this code constantly running and compiling. Let me show you that command again. It's just Scala CLI and then use the watch command there at the end. Now we have that running. And what happens a lot of times in programming is you're going, well, gosh, I had that sum function. That was really nice. But now I need a multiply function. So you create a multiply function. Looks very, very similar, but you just multiply those numbers. Then you come down here and you say, well, in addition to sum and print, what I also need is multiply and print. And again, the type signatures are all very similar throughout here. And the only difference is you call multiply right there. And now if you came down here, you could run multiply and print. And save that. And scoot this up just slightly so we can see that output. And now you can see that we're starting to get some duplication of code, not just up here in these two functions, but these two as well. And these are the ones I want to focus on right here. And when you look at the functions, you see that the only difference is this one calls sum and this one calls multiply. Everything about these two functions is exactly the same. So you're thinking, well, wouldn't it be cool if I had a more general function to do this work right here? And then I could get rid of these two specific instances and just use the general one. And so let's start working on that. Let's get rid of that one right there. And we want to call this one, I don't know, something like general function. And now I'm going to change the formatting just a little bit. Because what happens right here is we need some sort of function there. So actually, let me change the name here. And let's just call this exec for right now. And what I was thinking was we could just call this a general function. Or you know what, if we look at this a little more carefully, we could say, well, this is a function that takes two integers and it returns an integer. So maybe we could come up with a name that describes these functions, sum and multiply. How about if we call that int to int function? I know that's a little unusual, but it kind of describes what's going on here where we have an int, and then we transform those into another int over here. That's the way you read these function signatures. So that's where I'm coming up with that name. And now what we want to do is pass this function into this other method or this other function right here. So I'm going to do that and say, well, can we pass that in as a parameter? And we notice when we look at parameters, the way they're defined is A colon some type, then B colon some type. And that's what we want to do down here. We have the parameter name, a colon, and then the question is, what is the type over here? What can we do about that type? And I've already kind of given that away a little bit. So I'll let you think about that for just a moment. Can you think about how I gave that away when I was pointing up here? And what I will do is just copy that and paste that right there. And now we just have to make a couple of changes here. So we don't need variable names right here. So get rid of those variable names. And then this colon becomes the rocket symbol or the transformation symbol. And that is literally all you have to do to pass this in as a function right here is give this function parameter a name and then specify its type, what it is you're looking for. And this part that I have highlighted exactly matches this function signature right here and this function signature right here. And as I mentioned, the way you type this here is just a little bit different. But this describes a function that takes two input parameters and transforms those two input parameters into a resulting int. And that's what these functions do right here and here. And now the only thing you have to do is figure out, well, now I've named this function exec. So I want to exec instead of using those other ones. And now I have to pass in these functions down here. And that turns out to be pretty straightforward. You just put sum in right there. And you put multiply in right there. And I'll save that. And you see the exact same output we had before. The sum is 5, and then multiply yields the value 6. And that's really all there is to defining a function like exec that takes in another function like this as an input parameter. But what I'll do to extend this just a little bit is just say, what if we wanted to do one after the other and then print them? So for lack of a better name, I'll just call that exec2. Then I'm going to change the name here. I'm just going to call that function f. And then I'll call the next one g. So what I want to do is take in two function parameters with exec2. They're both going to have the exact same type signature, just like before. And now what I want to do is execute f first. And actually, let me change things a little bit here. I don't want to print that. I want to get rid of that print statement. What I want to do is I want to run the first function. Then I want to run the second function right here like that. So now I have res1 and res2. And now I want to return res1 and res2 to whoever called me. And this is where tuples come in. So I've mentioned tuples before, and this is a really nice place for a tuple. So I can return a two-element tuple by returning res1 and res2 right here. And then even though the editor isn't showing anything right now, this function was returning unit, and now I need to declare that it's returning a two-element tuple because that's what I have right here. And because both these values, res1 and res2, are int, all you have to do is replace that with int and int. So now exec2 is a function that returns two ints inside of a tuple. So now we can come down here and say, well, I want to print line the result. Or if you prefer, what we could do is say, how about if we get the tuple out of exec2, and what I'm going to pass into exec2, if we start looking at these parameters, are two integers. So just for something different, we'll do a 3 and a 4, and then two functions, f and g. So these could be any function in the world that match these types right here. Any function that takes in two integer parameters and returns an int, that's what we can accept down here. So right now we just have sum and multiply, but if we had other ones like subtract, for instance, then we could put that one in here as well. But I'll just put multiply in here. And then I will just say print line that tuple right there. So we'll save that. And now we see the same output, 5 and 6 for this expression here and this one here. And now here I'm calling exec2 just like that. And you can see the result is this two-element tuple down here, 7 and 12. And we get that because I passed in sum first. So that's the first result right here. Sum becomes f right here. And then multiply becomes G right here and right there. And now I could show more examples of this, but really that's all you have to do to pass one function into another is define the type signature of the function that you want to receive. So here I received two functions as input parameters, and then up here I received just one function as an input parameter.